What's up, everybody? My name is Dr. Zach Guiser, and this is another entry into the Athlete Development Journal where we talk about developing speed, strength, power, health, and character so athletes get the most out of their athletic career.
Yeah, straight A student, but I'm friends with the cool kids. Following the rules and the rubric. Freestyle on the bus.
If everyone else is doing it, shouldn't you do it too? You don't want to get left behind, do you? The youth and high school sports world is a poorly designed machine, largely run by people with good intentions but bad information, and people with bad intentions but even worse information. The answer to your development is rarely more. More camps, more showcases, more games, more teams, more practice, more lessons, more equipment, more recruiting services, whatever it is. The answer is less, but better. Identify the important things and double down on those. I always joke that if I was an amoral, ruthless Ebenezer and just wanted to make as much money as possible, I would open a physical therapy clinic solely designated to back pain and softball athletes. I'd build my brand out around that and then charge out the wazoo. I see a higher low back injury rate in the sport of softball than any other sport, bar none. The thing that irks me the most about it, though, is that most of these are preventable to some degree. You know what? Actually, I don't want to use cautious speak. Most of these are preventable. I think the disproportionately high rates of back injury in softball players comes down to a confluence of three factors. Number one, you're playing a sport that the human body isn't really designed to do at a high level. Evolution didn't build us a spine that's designed to handle astronomically high rotational forces repeatedly for weeks, months, and years on end. Number two, the acute to chronic workload ratio is often disastrous. We're going to double click on this one here in a moment. And number three, the long-term chronic workloads are incessant. The first and third point aren't our topics for today, but high quality training and stepping away from the sport for around 3 to 4 months per year are simple solutions, respectively. Today, however, I do want to dive deep into acute to chronic workload ratios. Our bodies are the most adaptive machines on Earth. The amount of stress they can handle is truly awe-inspiring, but you must gradually build up to handle that stress. If you slowly build your workload, your body will have time to adapt and make the changes it needs to make to handle more load. If you go too fast, however, your body won't be able to handle it and you'll end up injured. We can actually measure this using an acute to chronic workload ratio, which we'll abbreviate as ACWR. The ACWR is calculated by dividing the acute load, which is the work done in the current week, by the chronic load, which is the average work done over the past 4 weeks or so. If you have an ACWR over 1.5, you are 2 to 4 times more likely to get injured. Let me run that back. If you have an ACWR over 1.5, you are 2 to 4 times more likely to get injured. The injury risk, however, is lowest when you stay in the sweet spot of 0.8 to 1.3 ACWR. The problem with our current back pain season that we're in is that we've seen exponential increases in volume with the first week of practice ramping up with ACWRs over 3.0. And remember, if you're over 1.5, you're 2 to 4 times more likely to get hurt. And we're at 3.0. To build out an intentional ramp-up period, we reverse engineer from the game demands. But for most softball players, this is where things get really interesting. In an entire softball game, you're going to get around 10 live swings. You'll take a handful of BP swings pre-game and a couple dry swings before each plate appearance. In total, though, you're probably swinging about less than 30 times on game day during a 3-hour time period. I had some of our softball girls count their swings in recent practices. We had 90 swings in a 2.5-hour practice, 105 swings in a 2.5-hour practice, 85 swings in an hour-and-a-half practice, and the real zinger, 150 swings in a 30-minute batting lesson. Your single-day practice loads are over 3 to 5 times higher than your game day loads. That is such a large discrepancy between how many swings are needed in a game versus how many are actually taken in practice. Look, I won't pretend I'm the least bit qualified to serve as a hitting coach, but I do teach movement for a living, and that quick-paced volume method runs counter to every motor learning principle. If you want to train a skill, deliberate practice is much more impactful than mindless volume, which means purposeful, iterative repetitions move the needle much further than rapid-fire, willy-nilly swinging. But that's not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is that we're seeing athletes asked to do these loads on day one. They're going from very little swings to 150 swings in a session. If you are insistent that your athletes absolutely must get that many swings in during a practice, then you have to at least slowly ramp them up to be able to tolerate it. Let's say your regular practice plan calls for 350 swings in a week. You'll reverse engineer by starting at 40 to 50% of that volume, which is 140 to 175 swings in this instance. Then, each week, you'll increase your volume by about 10%, gradually working your way up to that 350 swing marker. These weekly workloads should be spaced throughout the week. You can't save up your swings and do 200 in one day. That just puts us in an acute to chronic workload problem within a single week. Importantly, every rep counts. Dry swings, soft toss, live ABs, they all get added to the swing count. I know that's a lot of confusing math, so I built something out for you. I created a swing planner that automatically builds out your ramp up period based on the number of swings that you want to get work up to, how aggressive of an ACWR you're willing to use, and how many days per week you plan on hitting. It's free to use at gtperformance.co/swing planner. I can't tell you exactly what you should do. That's not my job. We're all individuals free to make our own decisions. However, I will tell you what I would do with my daughter. If it were my daughter who was a 13 to 18-year-old softball player, she would be on a swing count. As a starting point, her upper limit would be about 500 swings per week. She might be able to tolerate more. She might be able to tolerate less. So when the season was approaching, we'd use an ACWR of around 1.30 to ramp up to that upper limit of 500 swings using the swing planner. She would pay attention to her symptoms and notice when excessive low back soreness starts to pop up. Over time, as we're tracking swings and soreness, she'll identify trends and find out what her individual upper limit should be. I do have a special note for pitchers. Pitchers have a unique issue where swings aren't the only high volume extension rotation forces you're asked to do over and over again. You have to factor your pitches into your progression plan. The spinal forces in a pitch, however, are much less than a swing. It seems that the forces are about half. That's a rough estimate, but based off of the research, that's the best I can approximate. So for every 2 softball pitches you throw, that's a roughly equal to 1 softball swing. You can use the same swing planner to map out both your swings and your pitches. I'd put the upper limit for pitchers at about 250 swings per week and 500 pitches per week. Again, some will be able to tolerate more, some will be able to tolerate less. And yes, you need to count your practice reps, your bullpen reps, and whatever other reps you're taking. One of the counter questions I often get when discussing this is, well, why don't I see these back injuries as often in baseball? You do see back injuries in baseball, don't get me wrong, but they are not as frequent. To which I'll respond, 2 things. Number 1, when little boys go through puberty, they add a ton of protective muscle mass and thick bone mineral density. When little girls go through puberty, they don't. Number 2, the public health crusade to instill pitch counts in the sport of baseball has successfully raised awareness about overuse. It hasn't cured it, but it's raised awareness. Pitch counts in baseball were designed largely to combat Little League elbow and Little League shoulder. The same crusade didn't happen in softball because the pitching mechanics don't place the same stress on the elbow and shoulder, and therefore they're promoted as being more safe. However, that force just ends up moving downstream and producing wear and tear in your low back. Furthermore, because pitch counts have had a mind share in the baseball community, that permeates through other aspects of the sport as well, like less overall swings taken in a given practice. Obviously, this is a gross generalization, and the sport of baseball has plenty of issues on its own, but the public health crusade has had an impact in some degree. All right, if you just wanted the TLDR, here you go. The problem is that softball athletes are experiencing a back pain pandemic, partly caused by an acute to chronic workload ratio spiking issue. Essentially, athletes are doing too much too soon without a proper ramp up. A typical game requires around 30 swings, yet a single 30-minute private lesson can reach up to 150 swings. This is 5 times the game day load, often forced on athletes on day 1. If your acute to chronic workload ratio exceeds 1.5, you are 2 to 4 times more likely to get injured. So we want to stay in the sweet spot of 0.8 to 1.3. The way we can do that is starting at 40 to 50% of your target weekly volume, increasing total volume by about 10% per week. And for pitchers, count every 2 pitches as 1 swing to track your total spinal stress. I have built out a free swing planner at gtperformance.co/swing planner, and you can automate the math and build a safe 500 swing per week progression using that. Obviously, I have to put the caveat that this is the first time ever coding everything. Everything looked great whenever I was using it. However, that is for educational purposes only and should not be used as medical advice. Please consult a healthcare professional before you begin any athletic training program or you start using it for any medicinal purposes in any way, shape, or form. And I want to finish with a question for you to ponder. If you could never play, watch, or think about sports again, what would you do? How would you fill your days? If you don't have an answer, it might be time to expand your horizons and learn more about what lights you up. And as always, let's wrap it up with a couple important things. Number one, this newsletter and podcast is completely free. I spend many hours each week researching, writing, illustrating, recording, editing, and uploading. The best way you can support it and allow it to continue is to share it with people you know. You can send them to gtperformance.co/newsletter and they can subscribe there, or you can just share this podcast episode wherever you get your podcasts. Like, subscribe, follow, whatever it is you do on that platform. Number two, everything in these newsletters, podcasts, social media, and on our website is for educational purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice for you or your athlete. Please consult directly with the healthcare professional. Thank you so much for your help in spreading the word about athlete development. And until next time, go be great out there.
Yeah, straight A student, but I'm friends with the cool kids. Following the rules and the rubric. Freestyle on the bus and it's too lit.